Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Hobbymate Comet and Meteor video series. In this part we're going to be installing the flight controller, the 4-in-1 ESC, and the motors. So let's take a closer look at each one of these parts. So this is the Omnibus F4 flight controller. This is version 6. This is the newest version. So there's the front of the board, and there's the back of the board. And so we have pads here for connecting up the VTX and the camera. We have pads here as well for connecting up over here our receiver, and those are primarily the ones that we'll be using. There's also a connector here that is utilizes this 8-pin cable down here to be able to connect the flight controller directly to the ESC. The ESC is an Airbot Typhon 32. It's BL Heli S. It's compatible with D-Shot 1200. It's capable of batteries anywhere from 3S all the way up to 6S. So you've got the battery terminals here. We connect up the battery lead, and you have each one of the motor outputs here. And here is the same connector on the ESC that we saw on the flight controller that uses the 8-pin connector. The motors that come with the Meteor kit are Hobbymate branded, but they're RC in power. They are 2306 motors. They have 2750 kV or an 1800 kV version is available if you want to run up to 6S. You can see on the back here, they have very nice motor windings. They have a hex nut instead of the C-clip on the bottom for the retaining. That's always good. It's got good wire protection here from the bell, and the wires are nice silicone and they're long. And so they're all right-hand thread, and I actually prefer that because then they tighten up just fine on the propellers. Also in the kit, you get an iFlight Force VT 5804 V2 VTX. So this is anywhere between 25 milliwatts up to 600 milliwatts output. It does come with this little dipole antenna if you decide you want to use it, but in the kit you also get a right-hand circularized Fox ear Lollipop 2 antenna. This is a very nice antenna. And so this is compatible with smart audio. You can see here it's voltage capable anywhere from 2S all the way up to 6S, and it does have a 5-volt out for the camera if you want to use it. But on the flight control board, there is a regulated 8-volt output that's to be used for the VTX and for the camera. So also for the camera, or for the VTX, you have a MMCX connector that's capable, that will end up using this pigtail, and it is SMA. Okay, so the camera is a Fox ear Aero Micro Pro. This is a CCD camera. This particular one has got a 1.8 millimeter lens on, so it's pretty wide angle. So this is a very nice camera. I actually prefer CCDs over CMOS. You don't get the rolling shutter effect. So that's a nice camera they've provided here. Also in the bind and fly or plug and fly and bind and fly kits, you get some hardware for the stack up necessary to install the flight controller, ESC, and VTX, and so on. So one thing that's different in so I've got the Comet frame here, and I'm going to be assembling this one as well. So just all the same components come with the Comet frame. The only exception is on the Comet frame. Comet comes with again still RC in power motors, Hobbymate branded, but they come with 2305 motors in either a 2500 kV version or a 1800 kV version. Again, compatible up to CX. The quality of the motors is still the same between the two sizes, but they just slightly different sizes come with each drone. Also, in the Bind and Fly kit, you can either get an FR Sky RXSR receiver, which is what I'm going to be installing here in the Meteor, or you can get an XM Plus receiver, which is what I'm going to be installing inside the Comet. So, as we get ready to assemble these various parts, the kit does come with the manuals for each one of these various components. So we have the flight controller information along with a pinout. Very useful. You get the Typhoon 32 ESC with the diagram for it as well. You get the VTX information with the pinout. If you get the Bind and Fly, you'll get the information for the receiver, and the camera comes with the manual as well. Also, in the camera kit, you get the little joystick for changing the camera OSD if you decide that you want to use that, and of course the hardware and the cable for the camera. The other document that's useful is if you can download the assembly instructions that we're essentially following here off the Hobbymate website. You will also, within this, get the information about flashing the latest firmware to the flight control board, which we'll end up doing later on. Applying a pre-configured configuration file that addresses everything that takes care of essentially all the configuration and puts in the custom tune. So it has information on all of that. Also in here is a diagram for how to wire up all these components that we're talking about here to the flight controller. So this is essentially what we're going to be doing here on the Meteor frame with the RXSR receiver and wiring in that to the flight controller along with the 8-pin connector that goes down to the 4-in-1 ESC. And then in a later video series, we'll be installing the VTX and the camera, and in fact also the receiver. So with that, let's go ahead and move out some of these other parts, and we'll go ahead and install the motors first, and then ESC, and then flight controller. Here are all the parts we need for this step of the assembly. We have the motor bolts, we have the standoff bolts, we have some more standoffs here, some kind of, I guess, medium size, some short size. We have the vibration isolators, we have some more standoffs, and some hex nuts. We have the obviously the flight controller and the ESC here. Within the ESCs, you're going to end up getting two extra things inside the package. You're going to end up getting these little washers, these little fiberglass washers. They're used up on top of the ESC as spacers when you at these locations, and then you get this little foil sticky tape that we'll end up putting over the top of here. So I'll go ahead and get the motors installed. When we install the motors, it's a good idea to use some blue Loctite on these bolts. We're only the frame. We end up using only 3 of the 4 motor locations or motor bolts, and so but you just want to use some Loctite, just a little bit, on the end of these bolt screws as you put them in. It just helps make sure they don't back out. Okay, I'll go ahead and do that and come right back. So now I got the 4 motors installed. Again, just 3 bolts per motor. There's the extra ones down here. I've also installed the 30mm standoff bolts and the 8mm threaded standoffs. So at this point, we're ready to install the ESC. I went ahead and put the foil sticker on the top of the ESC. And so one of the things that we want to take a look at here is that, look at the motor numbering on the ESC. So Airbot, when they designed this ESC, has the motor numbering that is aligns with Betaflight as 1, 2, 3, 4. So this being the front of the quad. And so so you have an option now of whether or not you want your battery terminal to come out the left side of the quad, this being the front of the quad, the left side or the back. So either is fine. I'm going to install it in the back, but what that means is I'm going to be wiring the number 1 motor to number 3 ESC, the number 2 motor to the number 1 ESC, and number 3 to 4, and number 4 to 2. And so to take care of that, we can use the custom configuration file already available on the Hobbymate website, and apply the one that has the back ESC, and that automatically has the motor remapping commands installed on that and configured so that when you apply that, it automatically corrects for the ESC alignment. So you can do it either way. If you do it left, then all you have to do is apply the left side ESC configuration file, or if you want to go back to the back, then you apply the back. So what I'll go ahead and do, I'm going to go ahead and install it like this, and what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and pre-tin all of these pads, and we'll start getting the motor wires going over to the closest ESCs. Okay. Okay, so what we want to do is just heat up the pad a little bit and then apply the solder. And we'll just do that for every one of them. Okay. Now we'll do the battery terminals. Now the negative battery terminal, negatives are typically take a lot of heat to get them a lot of time to get them warmed up, because the negative pad runs all over the ESC. So sometimes you have to, it takes a little longer to do the negative. Yeah, that wasn't too hard. You see it solidifies up real fast on the negative because of all that heat dissipation. So now what you want to do is take the tie off your motor wires and go ahead and lay them out nice and straight. Put a zip tie down here to kind of keep them nice and straight and parallel to each other, and just bring them around the standoff. The rightmost one will go to this first pad here, center one, center pad, and this left one here go to the most outer pad, and just kind of round them here, and then we're going to be trimming them. We just want to make sure that we're leaving plenty of room, understanding the top of the frame is going to be coming down like this, so we want to leave plenty of room around this bolt, and you just you want to leave plenty of room because you're going to have standoff here going here. That's where this little washer is going to go. These little washers are going to be going right here. So they come with the ESC. So we'll just round it here like that, and we'll trim that off, and we'll go ahead and tin. You'll strip back a little bit. We'll go ahead and tin them, and that'll make soldering them down to the ESC pads really easy. So I'll go ahead and do this first one, and I'll be right back. All right, so I got the last wire tinned here for the first motor, and the pad's tinned. So all you have to do is apply a little heat, and they come right together. So you can see the wires are nice and parallel here. plenty of room for the standoffs as we make this stack up, and room for the top rails when we install those. So I'll go ahead and repeat this for the rest of the motors, and we'll take it from there. Now all the motor wires are soldered down to the pads of the ESC. Just kind of routed them around, kind of flowed them kind of parallelly to each other. Also want to point out that I went ahead and installed the little fiberglass washers here. These come in the ESC, along with the ESC and the ESC bag. So go ahead and put those in the corners. You know, just make sure that when you solder the wires that you give plenty of room for the standoffs to come down, because we'll be putting those on next. So we'll go ahead and put in this size threaded standoff next, and that goes down here on top of that. Then we will put a washer or one of these little O-rings, and then the flight controller, and then an O-ring on top of the flight controller. So I'll get those on there. I'll be right back. Now the standoffs are on, and we got the bottom O-rings on the standoff bolts. Also, while I was soldering up the ESCs, I went ahead and soldered up the battery lead. I like to put a little piece of heat shrink and slide that up on there, and then I'll hit it with the heat gun. And all that does is protect the ESCs, because this is positive battery voltage. If you accidentally put something across there, it'll cause a short. You can either use a piece of heat shrink, or you can wrap with a little bit of electrical tape just to protect those terminals. I think it's a good idea. Also have went ahead and put in the 8-pin cable. This connects the ESC to the flight controller. That just plugs in the bottom in there. Hopefully you can see that. And so the flight controller will go forward like this down here, and then this will plug in here, and then we'll put on the top O-rings next, and then these standoffs will go on next, and that's what the VTX gets mounted with. Then finally on top we'll put the nut that holds down the top of the VTX. So I'll go ahead and put the rest of the hardware on here, and we'll take it from there. So I got the rest of the mounting hardware and standoffs on. You can see how that turned out. If we look at the side here, you can see the bottom O-ring, the flight controller, the top O-ring, and then top standoff, and that's the threaded portion. And the VTX will go in between this space here and being held down by these nuts. Also went ahead and connected the 8-pin cable from the ESC to the flight controller. I put a little twist in it. I usually do that. And then you can just tuck it down here in the front. And then I also did go ahead and shrink down that heat shrink tubing to protect those battery terminals. So that's all that we're going to do on the Meteor in this part. I will now perform and do the same thing on the Comet frame, and I'll show you that before we go ahead and wrap up this series, or this part. Okay, so installed the motors, the ESC board, and the flight controller in the Comet frame now. Got the 8-pin cable up front here, connecting the ESC board to the flight controller. It's pretty much the same as the Meteor. Spacers a little different. You can see here what I use for the spacers that come along with the kit. So obviously the VTX will fit in between here. So I think that shows everything. So in the next part of the series, we're going to install the VTX camera and receiver. So that's going to wrap up this part. Thanks for watching.